feel super formal, so just kind of keep that in mind as you go. Just have some fun.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks.
Fantastic.
Go. Well, hello and welcome to the Roundtable Discussion. I'm Kirk Smick and I practice at the Clayton Eye Center in Morrow, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta. And I've got a great panel to work with today, people that have a lot of experience in contact lenses. And we're just going to have a discussion about what's important to us and what's important to our patients about contact lenses. And we're going to talk as well about monthly modality. And the reason that I think we should talk about that is it's growing. So there's got to be something there. Why so many of our colleagues are switching over from traditionally 2-week to monthly modality. And then, of course, the one day, as we saw at the AOA meeting during this past week, there are some daily lenses still coming to the market. But for the most part here in the United States, the monthly modality is becoming more and more popular. So we'll try to find out what that's all about. And then we also want to talk about not only what's special and what is interesting to us in terms of selecting a contact lens, a material, a design for our patients, but also what's important to our patients, because there have been a lot of studies done, and we know that sometimes what we think is important to our patient isn't important as something else might be. So we'll talk about all that also. Let's start out by just introducing the panel. I'm excited to be working with everybody. And Ashley, why don't you start and tell us who you are and where you're from and maybe anything special about you?
Perfect. I Ashley McFerrin, and I practice in Canby, Oregon, right outside of Portland, Oregon. Have just a primary care practice in a small town, but just bought it about 1.5 years ago. And just hired my first associate, which is really exciting. So things are going well.
And what's her name?
It's a man, actually. David Shin. He went to SCCO. He's great. Been great.
Good.
Kevin?
I'm Kevin Reeder. Practice in North County, San Diego. It's about a half hour from downtown. And in a 4-doctor multi-specialty practice, we do a lot of contact lenses, specialty lenses. I was an FDA investigator for the Paragon CRT lens, and we've done studies for Alcon, Ciba, Synergize, and a variety of other contact lens companies. So heavy clinical trials, and always excited about new technology, and the patients get used to that. So.
Great, that's valuable experience. We'll look forward to listening to. Jack?
Jack McIntyre, practice in a 7-doctor group practice in Corpus Christi, Texas, with a focus on contact lenses.
Good, and Phil?
I'm Phil Lowe. I practice out of a Queen Anne Eye Clinic in Seattle. It's a 2-doctor practice, mainly a lot of families. It's kind of a local family community there. Most of our patients are young, probably range between 20 to 50-year-olds, and that's the core of our practice, heavy on the contact lens side. My background's mainly in refractive surgery. I've been doing that for the last 10 years or so, and but I'm excited to kind of dive into a lot more contact lens in the recent years in private practice, so excited to be here.
Good. Well, we've got a lot of primary care experience, and that's kind of what we want to talk about today. This is still the heart and core of what optometry is all about, even though we have a lot of sexy things out there and new technology, but still, this is the basis of optometry. And I like when you said families come in, because I know just growing up myself with our family optometrist, and then myself having been in practice for 40 years now, I have 3rd-generation patients, so I've got the grandparents, the parents, and now the children. That's really exciting, and what makes it special to be a primary care practitioner. So let's start out with lens selection and why you select, what thoughts go through your mind, why you select a particular lens for a particular patient. I'm always curious if a practitioner has one lens that they try to fit on everybody, or what the thought patterns are to say after you've examined the patient, talk to the patient. What's special about what they say that goes through your mind that makes you reach for a particular lens? So Phil, let's start with you. And
Okay. Well, I think the first thing I try to think about is really connecting with the patient, right? Understanding what their needs are, what they want. I mean, it's a obviously we got to the point where they want contact lens to find out how often they want to wear it, type of RX they have, and really think about what really fits their needs, because not everyone has the same needs. And I think through your assessment, through the examination, it can isolate quite a bit. Some people may have, really healthy eyes, and I think a lot of modality fit that. Some patients have heavy allergies and they want to be in contacts. And then you look into other modalities. But the RX also points to it. Presbyope, you got to open up the door for the multifocals, toric lenses, and so forth. That really guides you, I think, what lens we fit.
So just the actual material, you're not limited by that, like you want to use a special material on anybody. You kind of have a pretty open mind, it sounds like.
Well, I think on the most part, I think the consensus would be we kind of start off with the silicone hydrogels. And
Sure.
that's really where I think I would assume most of us are thinking right now. I know that's what
Okay.
I do.
Jack, any other thoughts?
Yes, we just discuss with the patient what they expect, what they're looking for. If they come in with some preconceived notions, if from a health point of view we're unable to do that, we explain why. And then we just go from there. We do have certain lenses we like. We like the newer lenses of silicones and so forth. And that's pretty much what we do. We try to get some input from them, and then if medically we're unable to do that, we just explain why.
You bring up a really great point, and that's the fact that we don't sit back and have our preconceived notions, but you want to know what the patient's expectations are, and I love that. So when a patient comes into your practice, Kevin, typically, and this would be a new fit, how much information do they have in this digital age that we live in? What are their expectations? Or do they just leave it up, whatever you think, Doc?
Well, they think it can be just like their glasses, and why can't it be better? And so they think there's just enough information out there for them to be dangerous. I think so we have to really educate them. And so we ask them, are there times in the day or the week that you wish you could see without glasses? And that kind of opens up that contact lens discussion. And then, like you say, based on RX and health, here's what I think is best. So it's what do you want to? What are your goals? Do you want to wear them a few days a week just socially? Do you want to wear them, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week? I always kind of find out, is it just a complement your glasses, or is it just to replace them? Do you just hate these completely? Because they're, as we'll get into multifocals and so forth, their motivation is higher if they're really frustrated with those glasses, So if they're just thinking, it'd be nice to have it, convenient, then they probably aren't going to spend the time and maybe be as adaptable with some of these other modalities. So,
And I know, Ashley, we've all had the experience where particularly children, maybe in their teens, come in and their friend just got contact lenses from wherever they go, and they've decided that they need them too because of the friend and peer pressure and getting to that 13 and 14-year-old young lady who doesn't like herself in glasses anymore. But yet sometimes after they really go through insertion and removal, we make a professional decision that maybe they should wait till next year also. Have you had that experience?
A little bit, but my what I always tell parents is, it's a big and with the teenager in the room is it's a big responsibility. There are risks to wearing contact lenses, and I honestly don't set an age, but I have a discussion with the family of, do they brush their teeth every night? Do they make their bed? Do they the parents know how responsible their teenagers are, and I always kind of just say, if you're on board and if they're motivated, then we'll do it. And we have very serious discussions, of course, and they get all sorts of literature to take home with them. And but teenagers is probably one of my favorite people to fit, because it can totally just change their, open up their world.
Personality.
Yeah.
We've all seen that.
and it comes with responsibility.
Yes, big time.
Well, that's great. So I'm really impressed, and this is what I would expect from a professional also, that we all are thinking about the patient's needs and we're good listeners and what their expectations are. So that's great. I said at the outset that I wanted to talk a little bit about the monthly modality because of the growth that it's enjoying. And I know when I talk to my colleagues, they're all talking more and more for different reasons. Financial certainly is one of them, and the fact whether or not patients are actually following our instructions or not. So let's talk about monthly modality, and and how much you're using it, for example, and if that's changed over the last few years, and what's unique about monthly modality to you?
Well, I think
Phil?
the monthly, for a lot of patients, whether it's a lot of new patients, let's say, I think the monthly modality, it makes sense because I think, our mortgages are paid in monthly installments, with monthly payments, monthly subscription. I think the monthly idea makes a lot more sense to patients when you talk about that. I think sometimes when you go into a different modality, it may not make as much sense. It's an easy conversation to have. I also think that compliance, like a lot of patients, obviously to them it makes sense too to be able to do that as a monthly regimen. And I find that back when we first had a lot of contact lenses that may be quarterly, half yearly, and all the protein bulk and so forth. I mean, the monthly lens by far it's so much better than that. And the other thing I do reiterate to a lot of patients, and they're not doing dailies and doing monthlies, is sort of the solution. I think that comes into play too, is the taking care of the lenses. So there's some education to it, but on the most part, patients are more receptive to the concept of monthly. They understand it much more.
So you think that compliance is probably much better on a monthly modality?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's a great reason for sure.
Yes,
Jen?
and that's one reason several years ago I made the big shift to monthly, because it seemed when I asked all my 2-week patients, how long do you wear your lens? It seemed, I was startled if anyone said 2 weeks. So it seemed to be 4 to 5 weeks. So what I now say is, how long you wear your contacts? And they say, about 4 or 5 weeks. I said, I'm going to fit you with a lens that's approved for monthly, and that's in alignment with what you're doing now. And that seems to make logical sense to them, that they know they've been stretching it, so I'm just fitting them with a lens that lets more oxygen in. That's the wearing schedule they're doing already.
Yeah,
And I don't tend to find actually that then they're wearing them 6 or 8
Longer,
weeks.
no.
It's that point, that
Yeah.
4 to 5 weeks. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I do the same thing. It's how often do you replace your lenses, and it's rarely 2 weeks, and sometimes in a different lens it might be 2 months occasionally. But I say what we're going to do, what we found with most patients that have your prescription is, you get a new lens when it's a new month. New month, new lens. That's how you remember it, and it's easy to remember. You wear it, 14, 15 hours a day. You take it out, clean it for a month. At the end of the month, you toss it. You put a new set in. It's healthy. It's your eyes are stay healthy and your vision's consistent. So I kind of explain, here's what the future is going to look like when you're in this modality.
So Kevin, are you doing more monthly now than you were 3 to 5 years ago?
No, I think we've always been on monthly.
You've
I
always
never
been
got on the
monthly.
2 week. Yeah,
I know.
any 2 week I always just say, okay, this is the better way to wear a lens. This is a more durable lens. It's deposit resistant, and it's for month.
And Jack, I did hear you say that you probably
Yeah.
shifted your thinking a little bit over the last few years.
Right.
terms
Now,
of-
we very rarely do a 2-week lens.
But at one point you did.
Some years ago,
Yes, and I think that's what a lot of our colleagues are echoing, which is why the monthly modality is growing. And do you continue to see it growing over the 2-week choices then, as more and more of our colleagues think this through?
Absolutely.
I think so. Yeah.
I think also because the range of RX we can get now, and, it's quite a spectrum of RXs, so we can cover a wide range of patient needs. From sphere to toric to multifocal, which I guess we'll talk about.
We will,
Yeah.
for sure. So just to kind of summarize this a little bit, when we talk about is it your choice or the patient's choice as to what lens they get, it seems to me like that's kind of a joint decision based on a lot of different factors. So it's kind of a teamwork thing between us and the patient then. Would you all agree with that?
I think you get more compliance too when you kind of get it from, you sort of offer a choice, you sort of recommend a choice, and they're involved with the decision making. I think
Right.
patients tend to be more
Some
compliant.
buy-in.
They tend to, I think you build a trust there, and they understand that you're listening to them because you reiterate their needs. And I think that's really powerful to be able to convey that to a patient.
Definitely.
Great,
I
that's
agree.
a good point. Well, let's switch gears here for just a minute and talk about the fact that we live in a very mobile society. Patients are relocating all of the time, and they're also changing doctors not just because of that mobility, but because of healthcare plans. People's employers change their healthcare plans, and sometimes they went to my colleague down the street, and with the new healthcare plan now, they have to come see me, or vice versa. So we're getting a lot of what we'll call new patients, patients who are new to our practices, but are already contact lens patients. And I'm curious how you handle this if you have a patient who's been wearing a 2-week modality, perhaps not being so compliant, and we want to introduce them to a new modality such as monthly. How do you start that discussion? How do you initiate it, and how much resistance do you get from your patients on this?
Well, I find in certain 2-week lenses, one of the things I always see that the lenses are so tight. And so whether it's the fit of the lens or if they're not in a silicone hydrogel lens, then I start kind of explaining of why the lens you're in right now I don't think is the best one for you. And I also, patients are very keen on the new best technology and what's the best, greatest thing. And so I do a lot of that kind of, saying, well, this is newer and this is better and this is the most up-to-date technology. And you get a lot of buy-in from using kind of terminology like that. So, and I used to think that there was a lot of resistance from patients trying to, switch them, but maybe my verbiage has gotten better, but you're the doctor, you make the recommendation,
right.
And they tend to kind of go along with it, in my experience.
Right. I have the same experience as just explaining this is what we found works with other patients with your prescription, your eye health, your situation. So this is what's been successful for others, and you'll have the same success if you follow my recommendation.
And I think Ashley brought up a good point also that anytime you go to a practice management seminar anymore or a course, with all the new government regulations that are coming out, we really need to distinguish ourselves as individual practices. And the new technology, Ashley, that you mentioned, to me, in my practice, that's one of the greatest things we do. And we don't just do it and have it, we explain it to the patient so they know that, wow, this really is a special test I'm getting. They really care for my eyes. I didn't get this at my last experience.
Right.
And so I think that's going to be responsible in the future, and contact lens technology as well for maintaining growth in our independent practices of optometry.
I think the challenge a lot of times, I know for me and some of my colleagues and that we talk about, is when a patient comes in, they have a concern, they have a problem with their contacts. That's an easy change. That's an easy switch.
Yeah.
It's an easy way to improve, because you're going
Yeah.
to, we're problem solvers as doctors. They have a problem, we solve it. The challenge is when the patient comes in, how's your lens? Great. How's your vision? Good. What are you going to do next? What do you have to offer for them? And I think the doctors that spends that extra time explaining the newer technology, whether it's more oxygen going through the lens, it's more comfortable, it works better for high RX, or we got, hey, look, there's new lens. I know you weren't readers, but there's something else we can replace it with. And when you offer something else and they didn't realize that there was something better, I think that's really where the switch comes in.
So, Jack, what would your advice be to your colleagues then? You're at a meeting, you're sitting around having dinner with a group of friends, and you're talking about the issue of getting patients to introduce them to new technology, because Phil just said it. A lot of patients are comfortable with their lenses. Right. They do feel they see well. So we want to be careful not to be perceived as car salesmen or something, or that, patients get, sometimes they're a little suspicious, aren't they? So what would your advice be to how to start this conversation to your colleagues?
Well, I think it's terribly important, because you may have the best lens in the world, but if you're uncomfortable having that discussion with the patient, then you're not going to switch them. So what I do, I have an oxygen graph, actually, and I have it from the 18 up to the highest ones, and I'll say, this is where you are, and I want you to be here. And then the two pieces of equipment we use a lot is the topographer, and we show them their map, and then my new favorite equipment is the specular microscope, because per Phil's point, they may think they're doing great, and then we'll have an image of the endothelium, and it says, well, this is telling me you're not doing so well, and per our previous conversation about how much oxygen is getting through the lens you have, I'd like to shift you. And I think it's down about 2% that don't take that advice, between the fact that they're not wearing them the way they're supposed to, and now we show them objective information that says, this is your eye, and if we don't do something, it's only going to get worse. And it seems to really smooth it, because people do come in, they get loyal to certain lenses, And with the internet, they come in and they think they know stuff.
Right.
And-
Just enough to be
Dr.
dangerous.
Google.
yeah, and you don't want to insult them, but you have to
Yeah.
kind of, I think we have, professional obligations to steer them where
Right.
we know they
Educate
need to
them.
be. Yeah.
And it's really easy. I mean, it takes time to have the discussion,
Yeah, it
and
does.
it takes
Yeah, that's-
and
that's the challenge.
it is easy to just say you're happy, you're move on, and you do have to make a concerted effort to say I want my patients in the newest best thing, and take that time because it's all for their benefit.
Well, that's exactly right. And one more step to just carry that discussion kind of to finality is the fact that if the patient comes in 2 and 3 years in a row and you tell them that's fine, just reorder the same thing, they start to think that maybe that visit isn't quite as important, and maybe if they're just going to get those same kind of lenses, they don't need to learn anything new. Maybe they could get them at another source, like
Right.
on the internet.
Right.
So that kind of plays into this too, doesn't it?
That reminds me, we had a kind of an agreement, the doctors, that we about every 3 years, when possible, we'd change them, because after 3 years, you're doing the same thing, and what is the reason? Give them a reason to come back, and new technology is really the reason. And then they start coming in saying, "What's new this year?" Then they're asking you, "Hey, what's new?"
right.
So we kind of shift that paradigm
That's
for the patient.
wonderful, yeah. And it's legitimate because the technology is racing ahead. We have new things at our fingertips every
Right.
2 or 3 years.
Right, exactly.
So that's great. So let's talk about lens selection then. We covered it a little bit in the very beginning, but there's always, you see this statement about fitting the lens to the patient or the patient to the lens. What does that mean to you, and what thoughts go through your mind when you are sitting there talking to the patient? Phil?
Well, I think kind of we alluded to earlier, understanding what the patients, where the parameters are and where their needs are and connecting with them. I think we have to be engaged with the patients to understand their needs and what works for them. I think if I have in my mind, this is, walking in the exam, I'm going to fit him this lens, that's not going to work because there's going to be resistance. They don't understand why. But you really have to emphasize the benefit of the lens that you're fitting them in. And, if they came in with the lens that it's, let's say they're a repeat patient from a year ago and they're in a great lens. And I may not change anything, but I do want to talk about different aspects of what's new in the industry and so forth.
Are some lenses easier to handle than others? And if that's the case, is that part of your selection criteria? And I'm not thinking of any particular brand here, so I don't want to go there, but just in general?
Yeah, if handling is the reason they dropped out of lenses, then we'll say, well, here's a lens that's it's got more body and easier to handle and easier for application removal. So handling sometimes more than vision or comfort could be a factor.
And again, that's that individuality that we all have with our relationship with our patient and what their needs are. Sometimes dryness is another factor, depending
Very
on sometimes the sex and age of a female patient, for example, more susceptible to lens dryness, which
Right.
is one of the, it is the number one reason for dropouts in contact lenses now. So
It is.
certainly we all consider that at least when we're going through the selection process. How many times, Ashley, do you have a 40-year-old female patient who's been wearing contact lenses and comes in and they start having a less end-of-day comfort than they were 5 and 10 years ago? Do you ever see that?
How many times a day do I have that discussion?
Yeah.
And especially actually being a woman practitioner, they really talk about it a lot more, and especially when, whether it's a new medication or hormonal change in their life or whatever, they just open, the doors open up and they just go. But yes, and so many. You can just change the lens or the solution or whatever it might be or the modality in certain instances to get them more comfortable. But the other thing I was going to say is that so many think that they, when they have to start wearing reading glasses, that I can't wear my contacts anymore. And one thing about multifocals, around that age bracket, is that I start that discussion real early of, at 35, 36, 37 of this is going to be
Getting 'em
your
ready.
future. But I want you to know that it doesn't mean you have to stop wearing contacts. It doesn't mean you have to start wearing reading glasses all the time. There are options available. And they're like, they go, whoa, really? Because they are already thinking about it.
Right. They've seen their friends.
Yeah.
Not read the menus. So, yeah.
So that's one thing I really start that discussion early, so they're getting
That's smart.
prepared. Yeah.
That's great. Jack, did you want to?
And I think one thing that the veteran contact lens when patients, they just, I think sometimes they're used to something, okay? And it's not until you discuss it further with them. And that just happened last week. I said, so how is it going? And she goes, great. I said, any problems? No. I said, so you can wear these all day and night? And go, no, I can't wait to take them off when I get home from work. And I go, so you're having a dryness problem? Yes, but I always have.
That was normal.
Okay, now we have things, whereas if I'd stopped it with how are you doing, it would have been great, same lens, and she would have, had that same problem. So I've been surprised by that, but I think they get used to it, and they think they've tried maybe other lenses with other doctors, and they just think that's what contact lenses do, and they're not aware of the new options.
And that's why it's so important to be a good historian
Right.
and really draw this out of them, because a lot of patients come in and for exactly what you said, they think that things are the same and normal, but in fact there has been a slight change. And it's not discomfort as much as it is less comfort than it was. And so without a good discussion, and I think that's one of the reasons, again, why in our practices where we can take the time to do this, and Ashley, you said it takes a lot of time in your discussion. I heard you say that, and I think it's important. And if you get in too busy of a practice, or if you start practicing too busy, you miss a lot of this, and you don't get to have that discussion. And the patient leaves maybe less than fully satisfied.
It's obviously one of the challenges we all have, is, they've got a parent with macular degeneration, they're getting dry eyes, and they want to talk about contacts, and you're out the door and you go, oh, could I have laser? Try to squeeze all that information into that time that you've set aside for them. That's really one of our biggest challenges.
Well, this is a perfect lead into the next subject, because when we talk about time, we want to spend enough time, but yet, especially with all the changes out there in the healthcare landscape, we've got to be as efficient as we can and still take the time. So let's talk about fitting sets, because that certainly has changed a lot in the way we practice, and it makes ease of lens location a lot easier. So how do you use your fitting set, and how important to you is it?
Well, I think it's crucial to have a fitting set that has a large range. I think having lenses available at the time that patient's in your chair is important, because to have a patient come back in again, it's not the end of the world, but it's great to have everything done as soon as possible, and having the patient have that experience. And I think also having the lens fit well and comfortable right away also helps. I think what happens a lot of times is when patients put a lens in and they don't want to wait. But when a patient sits in your chair and you put a lens on, and it's not as comfortable, and why don't you wait a while before it gets comfortable? That's not what they want to hear. They want something that works right away. But in terms of the set, I think it's important to have that range, because if you have the right axis, when you fit toric and you have that 140 axis and you don't have that lens, the patient has to come back in. That's an extra step for the patient.
Yeah, and with the Biofinity fitting set specifically, when they put 2 axis 180 and axis 90 lenses at every
the smartest thing.
It's just life changing.
Yeah, it really is.
And also the 2D lenses at certain power. It's just they really thought out the fitting set. It's made a huge difference.
It really has. That just turned a corner for us, and to be able to put a diagnostic lens on and have the patient go out in the real world, test them for a week, and come back. So. That's why I say we're going to have you, test drive this in the real world and see how you do. And you come back with, vision was good, or a distance, but not so good for reading, or comfort was fine until the 10th hour. So
the 20th hour.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that how most of you? How do you fit lenses if it's a new patient, especially? Do you have them take your trial lenses home and then come back a few days later? Most of the time.
For new lens fits, yes.
For new
100%
lens fits?
of the time.
100% of the time,
Yes.
Jack?
I only do that with multifocals. With the other ones, I fit them and do the annual supply
That day.
there, and then we schedule them for the week follow-up visit. But I try to do as much as possible. I think, people are busy, And the lenses
Yeah.
are so good. If you fit a good lens, they're going to do well with them. And then the ones that are having issues, they will come back and you can do the follow-up. But with the multis, I always do the diagnostic. But with spheres and torics are so good now, I feel comfortable that we can do the annual supply right there. And that way, they're not out in the world, they're not searching online, they're not doing a lot of other things. They're done unless they have problems.
For
So
the
that's
year.
worked for us.
So on the torics, for example, probably what you do, and you tell me what you do, but you let them you order the annual supply. You have to order that. You don't keep those revenue lenses, of course.
Correct.
And they take the trial lens home, and then they come back and the lenses are there, and assuming you don't have to make a change,
Right.
then that they just take them and go.
Right, right.
But it's important setting that expectation that you're fitting with the lens and that they're able to get their supply and everything is sort of, the transaction is done at the time of visit as much as possible. I think
Right.
it really closes the loop. It sort of gives it a finale. Otherwise, they're sort of in limbo, and I think it makes it more difficult for the patient either want to follow through with either purchasing the lens or for maybe for them to even come back for the follow-up. They may say, "Oh, this lens is not good. I don't want to keep going."
So do you do that with multifocal also? Go ahead and have them pay for the annual?
That's a little more of a challenge because I think what the expectation I set for patients with multifocal is, look, we're fitting you with this lens. We're going to try it out. We may need a tweak. So don't give up. If it doesn't work well, there's things I can do to fix it. And I really emphasize that because I think there are challenges to multifocal fit. But, what's great about this fitting set, and at least the design, is there's so many variables you can play around with. And there's ways you can adjust to meet the needs of the patient. So for the multifocal, actually, I took that extra step to explain to them not to give up on if the vision's not that great, there's something I can do to fix that.
And this is
But we don't do the year supply on the first
this is
visit.
truly where the art and science of
Right.
contact lenses come
Right.
in, isn't it now
It
with
is.
multifocals?
So what we do is we have on the spheres, we deliver the diagnostic set, and we have the boxes in the office. We have the revenue packs, and they walk out and they say, if you have any concerns about vision or comfort in the next few days, then don't open the boxes. We'll come back and we'll see you and adjust it. Torics, we diagnostics and we say call our contact lens tech in a week after you're happy with your vision and comfort, and if you're not, we'll see you again. And multifocals, we actually do schedule that 1 week visit. So it kind of depends on the modality.
Exactly.
And with multifocal specifically, the spiel that I kind of give patients is that, I want you to wear these in your real life, and I want you to come back in and tell me when they work and when they don't work, and specific instances, and I can alter the contact lenses to address those issues. And I always say, there's about 10 things I can change about each lens. Sometimes the tiniest little change makes a huge difference in your vision, and so I don't ever want them to say, well, or think that the first lens doesn't work. So I think, right, like you said, to educate them that there are changes to be made or that can be made.
With the multifocals, we started using a multifocal expectation sheet because we'd spend a lot of time, per Ashley's point, talking to them and so forth, and saying like driving at night, could be a challenge, or reading a medicine bottle and so forth. So we'd go through all that, and then they'd come back 4 days later and say, I can't read a medicine bottle. So I was like, okay. So what I did, I wrote an expectation sheet, and all that's there. So they get a sheet at the dispense saying that we feel you will enjoy this modality. It will give you better peripheral vision. You won't have to tilt your head up like you do with glasses and hurt your neck on the computer all day. But there will be times such as driving at night and reading very small print where you may either fall back to glasses on occasion or supplement them with some readers. But I think it's key. I think it's more important than the actual vision, because I have patients that I'm not thrilled with the vision, but they are.
Right.
And there's others that come back and they're 20/20 distance and they're with good comfort, and they go, I'm just not that happy with them. So I think the expectation is absolutely crucial to it. So we try to set that.
That's great, and that's really smart, and I think all of our colleagues could do a better job in that, rather than just giving them and go, so to speak. So setting expectations is something that I hope everyone takes away from this discussion today. Well, I know that we all have had some real positive success with the Biofinity lenses. And we had a little discussion about that before we met here, and we've all been very successful with it. Let's talk about the main reasons why, when you select the bioaffinity lens for a particular patient, what is most important? What have you found to be the reasons why you're so successful with this lens?
I think that you were speaking to, Phil, the initial comfort is good. And even the feel of the lens when they're handling it, patients often comment on that. In the case of the toric lens, the stability and the time for it to kind of settle in is no time at all.
Right.
and it works each time. It's quick and easy, but I think the biggest thing is that comfort, that initial comfort.
Right.
What about initial comfort is so important because that's sometimes their way of making the decision-making process. But what about comfort at end of day? How does that play into all this too? We kind of talked about Ashley's favorite female 40-year-old patients a little earlier, which we all have, of course. But that's getting to me to be what patients using our computers more, they're using their eyes more, they're getting older. We know the graying of America and all that. So end of day comfort seems to me like I'm hearing that mentioned more than I did 10 years ago, for example.
Absolutely, and one reason why I like the Biofinity so much is you get the initial comfort, but you get the end of day comfort.
Right.
The other aspect of it that I really like, there are other lenses that are very comfortable at first, and then they go south as the weeks go by. There's other ones that if you could hang in there for weeks, they would eventually get comfortable. What I've always liked about Biofinity, it's comfortable right at the beginning, and it's still very good at the end of the month. So to me, it's the whole package.
Good. What about, Phil, what about the relationship of the DK and the high water content? Do you like that combination?
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of choices there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that combination really stands out from the rest of the field. I think, from a patient standpoint, when you explain to them, they may not grasp the concept. So sometimes it's sort of over their heads a bit if you try to go too deep into that.
Sure.
I mean, I think there's really, you don't get another chance to make that first impression. I still go back to the idea and the concept of how comfortable it is when you first put it on, because that's make or break. And I think that's by far still the most important aspect of that lens for me.
Great. And then, of course, acuity is important. We haven't talked about that yet. And so the concept of having an aspheric lens, how does that play into how the patient sees and as their vision changes during the day sometimes? What do you feel about that?
A patient that comes in that's comfortable in their lenses, if they're -5 or above, I start talking about going into Biofinity. Even if their lens is perfect, that's a cue for me to kind of let them in on a lens that may have better vision, better nighttime vision than what they're wearing right now. And yeah, I think it's a great lens. The vision's great. Patients love it.
And then for the toric lens, Ashley, you made a comment about stability. And I remember several years ago when toric lenses, and it wasn't that long, by the way, that toric lenses really did start coming into their own when you're sitting, from my perspective, in time. But we used to have them sit out there and wait for 20 and 30 minutes in the waiting room with them on.
Yeah.
And that could really mess your day up as you're going through your patient schedule. So how has that changed? Or maybe you're too young to have it be changed. You just take it for granted. But how do you cope with that in the office, and what's your experience with Biofinity torics in particular?
In all honesty, 99.9% of the toric lenses I use are the Biofinity torics a lot for that reason, is because it works. If I ever have to change any parameter, it's usually to go a quarter difference, which the fitting set comes every half diopter, and but it's that initial, the vision locks in, and that lens is so stable, you never see any rotation. It's great.
So this works into that efficiency we talked about early on with managed care changing and everything.
One other thing I wanted to say about the comfort and you were talking about the DK is when silicone hydrogels first came out, and we had these really high modulus lenses, people there's patients that tried them and they'll come in and say, no, I've tried those lenses before, that new material, and it doesn't work and it's not comfortable. And this lens really speaks to that where it's found this really great balancing point of the modulus isn't too high and it's comfortable, and then you still have the silicone hydrogel, and say, no, this is, I always tell them there's first, second, third generation silicone hydrogel lenses, and this is the newer one.
Exactly. We've done the same thing. We didn't jump on early with silicone hydrogels, and we had those few patients that tried them and weren't good. We knew Cooper was coming out with this bioaffinity. We'd heard about it, and we were kind of holding them back. So then we have this really, truly third generation lens. So they didn't even have to go through some of the first generation issues, and they've been so happy.
Yeah, so modulus is really an important thing, and
it is.
And most of us at the table, I think, were around when that first one did come out from one of the other manufacturers, and it was really hit or miss with comfort, wasn't it, at the time?
Yeah.
I don't think it ever performed as well as they would like for it to have happened. So
We started seeing GPC again.
Yeah.
And we hadn't even talked about that for years. So it's
Back to the future.
Well, probably one of the toughest parts of all this, especially when we talk about the art and science, is the multifocal and fitting the patient and getting them happy with both their near and far vision. And is it a trade-off? Do we actually use those kind of terms when we're dispensing it or fitting a patient with multifocals? Do we sometimes make the mistake, I know some practitioners do, of talking about the fact that there is a balance there and their expectations should be, and you talked about expectations earlier. What goes through your mind, and what's your experience in terms of near versus far vision, and which do you try to, you try to get them both as good as you can, but if you have to err on one side or the other, which side is it?
I engage the patient and say, what's more important to you is, are you out in sales and actually, in a rental car looking at road signs, or are you doing more computer reading all day? But I talk about that balance, and I kind of do that distance and near. It's like I show them, I do this physical distance and near thing. Like you can't have one, without the other. So
Are you Italian?
No. I think I got it from an Italian doctor, but just to say, and we can say it 100 times. This isn't the same as glasses. And I said, this is not the same, but we can get close, and like you say, you can do 10 different things to make an adjustment and improve vision. But that expectation, you could say it, and they come back a week later and say, just what you told them. I can't see that road sign, and my computer's great. Can you give me this?
Yeah, one of the things I always do too is when we're trying multifocals is I have them pull out their cell phone or whatever and always focus on the near portion of the lens first, because there is a little bit of that, I couldn't read that a minute ago, and now I have these in and I can read that. And then
That's
we
the
go
wow
to the
factor you're talking about?
Yeah, and then we go and address the distance vision. We have a habit of just flipping on the acuity chart and starting there, and it's much better. Wow factor, like you said, when they can look at their cell phone or whatever it might be, a magazine in the
That's a
room.
great tip. I think that is just wonderful. And something that's resonating to me throughout all this discussion is that everybody here in this group does such a good job of listening to their patients and of taking the time to explain all these different things. I'm really impressed by the practicality of this discussion.
I just thought of something else. Just looking at what they can't see, So your goal is to see without glasses. Here's where you are now without glasses. Look at this. Let's put the diagnostics on, like you say. Now what can you see? Okay, then the distance and I don't use that word compromise very often. I don't like to do that, but just to say, whatever you do here to get that, what you don't have and what you really want, you may have to give up just a little bit of that quality of vision.
I think as ODs, sometimes we're hung up on the Snellen chart, where the the phones are what they're working at. I think if I had a surprise going back years ago when we started filming the multis, is we thought they're here to read, so we really focused on that, and people kept coming back and they said, "But I can't see far away." So it seems like they really need to see far, and you can put on some readers if you need to, but it's a lot harder to deal with if they can't see distance. And, you know, I wear the Biofinity Multi, and I just think it's awesome in the distance, and yet I can do anything I need up close except the medicine bottle thing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's what I wear also, and I'm wearing right now. Let's talk about surely a good multifocal lens like the Biofinity hasn't been around that long that a lot of us still have a whole stable of monovision patients out there, and they still come in. We're still seeing them annually, and now that we have confidence in a product that we really like a lot as a first-line fit, what's your tactics in terms of introducing this to your patient? Because they're pretty comfortable with what they've been doing, and change is something that is difficult for all of us in all different walks of life. So how do you present the concept of changing over? There is a price difference, for example, that'll come up. Phil, you want to?
I think a lot of times patients who've been in monovision for like 5-10 years or so, and they're used to it, they're comfortable with it. But I don't know, I haven't found too many resistance in terms of, you know, approaching it as something new, because they understood that when they were wearing single vision before, they had to switch to monovision, and that was something different. So I think, to me, to my surprise, I think people really has less resistant going, at least trying it. Now, whether it works for them or not, that's a slightly different story. But
What are
at least
your
switching
experiences, whether it works or not? Are you pretty successful in the conversion?
I find that what happens a lot of times is that when I again send the tone what this lens is capable of, and what may be a little different. I think some patients who have, for example, like astigmatism, like a toric lens, you really can't. It's very difficult to switch. But with Sphere, I find that, you know, some patients are more receptive to it than others. I don't think it's a 100% switch.
Of course not.
But I think that it's more often than not, it's good. It gives them binocularity. It gives them the ability to have both eyes kind of working together. And so...
Jack?
I tell them that if they were a new patient, I wouldn't be fitting them in monovision. I would be fitting them in a multifocal. But I think the key is, you know, gauging the depth of it. Like, you get some patients come in, they've worn them for 25 years, and I think if you force the shift, then they're just going to be unhappy and so forth. But I do tell them that this is new. I wouldn't be doing it the old way, and if monovision was so great, why don't we do it in glasses? So I tell them that this is a much better modality to go. And as per Phil's point, you know, some patients are fine with it. So overwhelmingly, we do multifocal, but we don't push it to the limit of basically forcing people who want and are very happy with monovision.
Okay, that's good advice.
I found when you're going to switch them to, I'll have a discussion of the adaptation to the vision. You know, the vision is different, and sometimes if I have a patient that's really on board with a multifocal lens and is motivated, but I really want them to succeed and have a good initial reaction, I'll say, you know what? It's going to work better if you will stay out of your contact lenses for a few days, wear your glasses, and have your brain kind of shift back to its normal state, if you will, and then try the multifocal lenses after that. And I've found that when they do take a little time away from the monovision lenses and then switch to the multifocals, it's a little bit easier.
That's a great idea. I like that.
See, we all learn from each other, don't we,
Yeah.
in these discussions.
So if they've been doing it for a while, they know what, you know, there's a far and a near. And I do kind of the same with the hands. We got distance in one, near here. What we can do with the multifocal is we can reduce that disparity. And that's, where is that better? Right here in the computer, and when you're at the store on a shelf, or, you know, your dashboard. So explaining that you may be more compromised than you realize here at that mid-range, and how we can get that back. And let's put on some diagnostic lenses, and let me show you. And I tell them, you know, every diagnostic lens I put on, so we'll put them on, let them settle, check your vision. But every lens I put on today will save us a visit, you know, down the road, making sure we get the best balance.
And in fact, you brought up a great point there in terms of balance and this business here. We're all familiar with Biofinity's balanced progressive technology. Other options for multifocal lenses by other manufacturers don't all use this DN technique, if you will. We've all found that to be very successful. What's unique about that, and what is it that you particularly like about it?
You know, we're
What does it mean to you?
in
also?
our practice, like, you know, with the younger, the earlier presbyope. I mean, I think the flexibility with the 2D lens on the eye, that, you know, because they're on the computer and they need some help with the close up, but it's more balanced. And I find that lens, even as they get through deeper into presbyopia, they really enjoy it because they really have that computer vision doing really well. Of course, if they need more ad, then we're at the flexibility again, the N lens in the other eye.
So do you
Very
actually start a lot of your younger, maybe shall we call them a 36-year-old pre-presbyope, or where they're just first starting? Because we all hear everyday patients that are in that younger range come in and say, I've started to notice, and they talk about the menu and things, and they do this. And you could ask them, well, is it really a problem yet? And if they, well, it's not really a problem, I'm just noticing it. Is that a great time to jump in and start the experience then with these
I always
lenses?
I always talk about it. I always have them try it. And I think, you know, again, depending on the symptoms, that really drives them. You know, some patients are motivated, some patients don't want to change. But I think I feel like it's my role to offer that to them, right, to explain to them. And they may not catch on, that's okay. It plants a seed, kind of what you've done in your practice.
Sets them up for next year.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, when they're having more symptoms.
Because they know there's
Yeah.
something. Yeah, and they'll get there. You know, we all know they're going to get there.
They have to be ready.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
They have to get past the denial.
Yeah.
Is it from a technology point of view and adaptation, is it better to go earlier than later with a multifocal lens, do you think? Or does it matter?
I think it makes it
Yeah.
easier, and I tell patients that, in fact, and you know, like you said, they kind of have to get past that denial stage, and I'll say, well, you'll get there, and we'll deal with it then. But the sooner we do it, the easier the adaptation is going to be for you, and it just is. Yeah.
Yeah, we explained it's a different way of seeing. Your brain has to go through this adaptation. It's simultaneous vision. It's, you know, you're looking through multiple powers at the same time, and your brain's deciding based on pupil size, you know, which part you're using. And as Leslie said earlier, you can change these independently. I say we can change the distance and near part of each lens independently, and that gives us a lot of options to give you the best far and near vision.
Right.
I find that some patients they come in the chair and you present this and say, well, I've tried it a few years ago, it didn't work, and so, you know, that's sort of the end of the story. But I always tell them that there's something newer, there's something that I think it's worth trying again. And I find that patients who are deeper into presbyopia, who tried before, but they may need more ad now, and they're actually able to, they're more willing to go into it now.
More motivated.
Exactly.
That's right.
The motivation goes up quite a bit, and then they can jump back into the lens.
That's
So
an
not to give
excellent
up.
point. I'm sitting here thinking, how critical is it when we think of this DN concept and this balanced progressive technology? How important is it to identify a dominant eye for successful outcomes? Does that play into this very much?
I
Do you
think
do
it's-
that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of fun to find out. We'll say, what's your dominant eye? I don't know. And we say, you know, we do this thing. And,
Sure.
and I said, it's a fun party trick. You know, tell your friends, you know, what's your dominant eye. But yeah, determining that. And then I even show them in a trial lens, with a handheld, you know, say, here's what the D and N looks like. How does that feel? And get an idea if they can handle a little bit of disparity or no disparity, and kind of helps me decide what the diagnostic lens is, you know, to start with. So we can swing, you know, you put their distance in a trial frame, and you can hold up the plus on one side or the other, and they'll usually feel it. It feels better on the non-dominant eye, that little more plus, you know. So occasionally, rarely, it'll be better on the distance, you know, far and near, but
Yeah, it's not a solid rule, is
No.
it? I mean,
No.
we need to make sure, but generally it is.
yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, that's
And it is
great.
good to test it like you're talking about, because it'll save you chair time.
Yeah.
You know, if
Yes.
just kind of confirming
Exactly.
the dominancy.
I think we pretty much, thinking about setting patients' expectations when it's a new lens in particular, I think we've covered that pretty well. Is there anything else someone wants to say about that particular subject?
One thing I tell patients is when I switch materials on them is say, you know, remember when you first wore contact lenses? At first, it just feels different, but it is. You will get used to it. I mean, it's just different,
Different.
and just
Yeah.
give it a day.
Jack, you said that you even have a form or a list of things that for the patient to be aware of. I think that's a great idea. I've not done that, and I'd love for you to share it with me one day.
That'd be great. Well, I read an article one time that says patients get something like 15% of what the doctor says. So 85%, you just forget it, right?
I believe
So we, it's in the package. It's with the lenses and the solution and so forth, and we tell them everything. And like I said, part of it was my own frustration of spending a lot of time with these patients, and then they'd come back in days later. The other thing I did, I've extended it to 2 weeks. I tell them that we don't see with our eyes, we see with our brain. And if you give the brain time, the brain will figure it out. So you need to give it. Because when they were coming back after 2 to 3 days, I said, I can't really know anything at this point. I'm not saying we're not going to make a change, but 2 days doesn't tell me anything. I said, and I wear them myself, and I know the first week it was okay. By the second week, it was great. So I said, if you would give me 2 weeks, the chances of you being successful are very high. But we will change it as needed. Don't worry about that.
And you're referring to a multifocal lens here in this case.
Right.
Yes.
I think the 2 weeks is when I made that switch
Yeah.
with multifocals to do the 2 weeks. The success rate went through the roof. I mean, it's very important.
I agree. We talk about the learning curve of their brain, and I say everybody's different, and you might have a shorter learning curve or a longer one, and we kind of laugh about that. I got a long learning curve; my brain just doesn't get it. So you think about what we tell progressive glasses wearers, 2 weeks at least for that adaptation. So we're going to expect on a contact lens with simultaneous vision, it's going to be shorter. So I think that's really got to be that's something that we all do is just give them 2 weeks so we have more success.
Right. And I think another thing vis-a-vis the monovision discussion was, I tell them God didn't give us 3 eyes. And so what's different now than when I started practicing is computers. So, 30 years ago, if you nailed the distance and the near, that was it. Well, now they all have here. So that's the other beautiful thing about the Biofinity multifocal technology is the overlap between it. So now they can see their smartphone, they can see the computer, and they can see far away.
We talked and identified the fact that comfort was very, very important, not only initial comfort, but end of day of comfort with the lenses. And the natural wettability of a lens has a lot to do with this whole business of comfort. We know a lot of companies we've heard words like plasma coatings and special ingredients, and all aimed at making the lens a more comfortable experience. How important is this natural wettability that we find in the Biofinity lenses, and what does that mean to you and your patients?
I think it's wonderful. I have a dry eye myself, and I was actually afraid to try the Biofinity because I like the ProClear so much. But I started speaking on the Biofinity, so I felt that wasn't a good thing to not be wearing it. So I was thrilled to death right from the beginning, per our points we've made earlier. It's just great. It's comfortable right when you put it on. It's comfortable at the end of the day. And I think nowadays people are very impatient. They don't want an adjustment. They don't want to eventually be comfortable. They want it to be comfortable. They want to walk out with the lens, and they want to get on with their life. And the Biofinity does that.
And the Biofinity, of course, has the hydrophilic technology in the material. They call it aquaform technology. And do you explain that to your patients sometimes when you're fitting them, at least in relative terms for comfort?
Yeah, I just talk to them. Depends on if they're an engineer or something else. But yeah, they always want more information. But I talk about what the benefit is, which is the end of the day comfort we talked about there earlier. Just it's going to feel good. I tell them you're going to have 16 hours, 18 hours those days. You're not going to be in a hurry to get home to take these out as quickly as your previous lens.
You actually mentioned earlier about when we were wearing lenses longer, some of the earlier lenses, about lipid buildup. You specifically mentioned that. With today's technology, particularly with the Biofinity lens, what are your experiences? What do you find with that? Has that been a problem at all?
We just haven't seen that. I mean, if they're rubbing the lens, we just still recommend a brief rub, at the end of the day, and not too often enzyme, as well. But I say, it's going to be a month of great comfort, from start to finish.
Do you all
Let's
use...
get rid of that. Sorry, please, for a second. Let's get rid of that fly. And Jeff, we're going to shift you over just a touch.
Okay.
And we'll see if we can encourage that.
This is the muffin for the
elsewhere.
fly.
Yeah, take a sip of water. He's a
Pull the
diligent
fly
little
down.
guy.
Yeah, he just, it seems like,
Come on, buddy.
Give them something to eat down there.
It's a fly trap.
Slightly distracting.
Does anyone
It's like-
need to take a 3-minute
Yeah,
tour of the
you
hall?
guys have been doing a great job.
You're welcome
Great
to.
job. Sorry about that.
In fact, I
The
think I will
interruption of the
too.
fly. Yeah.
All right.
sure, why not?
Yeah, your fly is good.
Take a break.
If he will, I will.
Yeah.
How can I have to?
Give us a go.
And 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're good.
Okay, so we left off talking about lipid deposition, and I wanted to just not only touch on that a little bit more, but wanted to know what your experiences were with any physical problems with eyes and eyelids, with the biofinity lens in particular. We've gone through so many different kinds of problems with lenses historically in terms of pathological processes. What's going on today? What are you looking out for? Is there anything that we need to be concerned about?
Well, I mean, I think overall, I haven't seen anything that's
GPC, for example.
No, I mean, we flip lids from patients that are coming in a year out now or 2 years out from, we're in biofinity, and they seem to do quite well. I mean, there's obviously the occasional patient who has lots of bleth or lots of emboliumitis, and obviously they may have some issues where we switch into clear care solution, talk more about the lens care, but I haven't really had too much problem at all with the biofinity lens. in my experience.
Rub and rinse or rinse only? Are you a rub and rinse guy?
Rub, yeah.
Rub.
I would say that's the one discussion I have, and it's with any lens, but it is just be sure you're rubbing your lenses, and it takes care of most any issue.
Right. Yeah, we do the same thing. I show them, you got to rub it 10 times this way and 10 times that way, and then you soak it in your solution, and you're going to be happier at the end of the month.
It stays clean the whole wearing schedule for the month, and I think it solves problems sometimes, because as you get the deposition on other lenses, then that is that feedback thing, and then the lids react to that, which then you produce more, which the lids react to that. So biofinity staying clean for the whole month, I think, really helps with a lot of the symptoms.
What I usually do when I see a patient come back in for an exam, a yearly exam with a contact lens, I look at them in the slit lamp, and then I ask them, how long have you been wearing this lens? And they usually, I think that puts them on the spot, and they try to be, hopefully they're truthful about it, more so than if I just asked them, but I'm not looking at them. And really, I haven't had any trouble with the lipids, with the biofinity at all.
We actually we usually have 4 externs in our practice at a time, and we teach them on every contact lens patient to flip the lid and just look and have them get in the habit of doing that. And every once in a while you get surprised and find something up there that you didn't realize. So I think it's great that you mentioned that. So we have a lot of different contact lens manufacturers, a lot of different choices. We have a lot of space taken up by a lot of different fitting sets. How important is it, or how convenient is it, maybe would be a better way to look at it, to have a family of lenses by a particular manufacturer? We've addressed several times today the fact that patients are getting older and going from one spherical lens into a multifocal lens, or they develop enough toricity that we have to fit them with a toric lens. Sometimes we have to fit them with a multifocal toric lens even, which is always a challenge. But how do you like the fact that the bioaffinity lenses now come in such a great selection that you can kind of move back and forth within the same manufacturer? Is that a convenience?
Very much so. To be able to fit a sphere in one eye and a toric in the other. And then when they go from wearing a bioaffinity to a bioaffinity multi, you can say you're not going to have to get readjusted to another material. We're just going to ship you into the multifocal version of what you're already wearing. So that takes out half the battle right there. So it's a huge advantage, as opposed to, back in the day, you had one manufacturer's in one eye and one in another and so forth, and then they might feel it differently. It makes it much better. And I think with the new healthcare system, all of these really need to look at their flow, the efficiency, and everything like that makes it so much simpler to speed up the process in a very efficient manner to the benefit of the patient and the practice.
Is the parameter extensiveness in the bioaffinity family of lenses satisfactory to you? Do you pretty much have available what 95% of your patients need in that one family of lenses?
Absolutely. Yeah, with a high sphere power and the sills around the clock, the axis every direction, and the diagnostic lenses there, it's been fantastic. And so I talked to him about, we're going to improve your vision, but we won't have to worry about a comfort issue with what you've been wearing before. And that's really nice. Like you say, it's just we're going to fix the vision part. The comfort won't be a factor because we know you've been great with this lens, this bioaffinity lens. So.
Well, you just said something that really piqued my interest, because I actually did a lecture here at the American Optometric Association meeting on some of the changing healthcare landscape. None of us know what the Affordable Health Care Act is exactly going to deliver. We're pretty sure we know what this new children's part is going to be, and the patients. But you talked about efficiency and how perhaps using the bioaffinity family of lenses can make us more efficient. That's just got to be important next year more so than this year, doesn't it? No matter what all the Obamacare brings us.
Absolutely, and I always, the SWOT analysis, I think it's really useful to reevaluate everything. I think as people, we get into habits and so forth, and you might be doing something that a professor taught you 20 years ago. So I drive my staff nuts with this, but I'm always walking around the office, and they say, oh boy, he's looking again. And I just look at it and look at the flow. And the flow, I think, is the crucial thing, because if you can see more patients without any reduction in quality, that's what we're going to need to do. I think it's not a luxury like perhaps it would have been 5-10 years ago. I think you're going to have to see more, but none of us are going to want to reduce the quality. So I really am an advocate of looking at your patient flow, and having lenses in the family just help all that.
So profitability, let's get down to that now, because that's always a fun thing to talk about, and it's important, and it's what keeps our employees fed and our patients happy when the expenses aren't terrible. So what about in terms of profitability, the bioaffinity and the monthly modality and all that? How does that fit into the bottom line, if you will?
As we spoke about compliance earlier, I definitely I feel like I see monthly patients back quicker than I do, say, 2-week lens patients. And
is everyone, that's really an important point. Is everyone satisfied that with the monthly modality patient, they are more compliant, not perfectly compliant, I would never ask that, but are they more compliant than they were with the 2-week modality?
Absolutely. I mean, I'd say, I haven't done any statistics analysis in practice, but 13 months is about all these 1 year or monthly patients can do. the 2 weeks, sometimes they were 18 months, 20 months, 24 months. Seems like they were just all over the board. So to really specify with bioaffinity to say, this is your wearing schedule, here's what you're going to do, new month, new lens, we'll see you in a year, you'll be right on track, we'll see you next June.
And it's not just about contact lenses. If you think about it, if you get the patients back sooner, you will be diagnosing diabetic
Right.
retinopathy sooner, you'll be picking up glaucoma sooner.
Right.
So as they get into that habit of coming back in 12 to 13 months, then they have the eye exam with it. So it has very beneficial ramifications for their whole health care.
And I think another part of the profitability as well is that because the fitting sets of the bioaffinity lenses are so inclusive, that you're not having to order trials
Right.
and you're not having to take up an extra exam spot and things like that. So that drives the profitability as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you have to order a trial, then your staff has to do that. It takes time from them from answering the phone. I mean, it all escalates
Yeah,
from there.
pick it up.
Another thing I find, I feel like the profitability comes in also from referrals, because I think, especially the multifocal, that's why I love
Yes.
fitting in, because they're going to tell a friend. Once
They
you
do,
get that
yeah.
fit and you nail it, I mean, I see the most out of all the lenses, that multifocal lens gets me more new patients. And you can't really
That's a
say that
great
about
point.
Sphere, but the multifocal does. And if you can improve on the toric than their previous toric, I think maybe they can refer. But multifocal by
They're the
far.
ones you're talking. They're the ones talking about, I can see the menu and here's how I did it, and I just we're in these new
They always talk
lenses.
about it during dinner with someone else,
Yeah.
because someone else they can't read the menu, right? Yeah.
That's one of our goals, is always to become dinner conversation. That's the best way to do it, when they're actually
That's right. Yeah.
seeing the menu.
That's great, the whole concept of just higher referrals, particularly with these specialty type lenses or more difficult lenses. Someone said something about contact lens solution a few minutes ago that I wanted to come back to. But first of all, let's talk about the annual supply notion. How successful are you? How important is it to you? And what are the reasons why we should be doing that? I feel we should be doing that for sure.
Well, if it helps with the patient retention, or at least their reminder of coming back in the year.
And perhaps not needing lenses as frequently as if they just get like one box at a time.
Patients always say the last lens they have is the one they stretch the longest, right?
Yes.
So when they have that year's supply, they're not stretching for the first 11 months at least.
I think it's crucial. I had a staff meeting about 5 years ago on it, and I said, the future of the practice could very well be dependent on how good we are at this particular issue, because if they just walk out with a pair or a 3-month supply, then they're shopping elsewhere. They're shopping elsewhere.
Right.
Those online, they're set up to refer to certain doctors who are in their system and so forth, so you lose the patient. But then it's not as healthy either. So what I think is also important, and you don't even have to hire or fire anyone, some people just can't do it. And I think it's just the way they are. Some people just can't do it. So I track my contact lens dispensers % of annual supply, and the ones that are poor, we do some training if we can, or I just simply shift them to another area that doesn't require that. And it has a huge effect, because I think if docs do that, they're going to see people doing 80% annual supply and some doing 20%. So we've gotten very specific on who we hand a chart to because of that. So I think it's crucial. And then they're done. They walk out and they're done for the year. They call, a year later saying, I need some lenses. And you say, well,
It's time.
you can't have any because it's time for your annual eye exam. And then you get into that habit of the annual eye exam, annual supply, and it's just wonderful. You don't even have to see new patients.
Yeah, and I think with the monthly modality specifically, when you can say 4 boxes is an
Yeah.
annual supply versus 8 boxes
Right.
with a 2-week,
Yeah.
Right.
patients can
Great.
really wrap their mind around that
Exactly.
a whole lot better
Exactly.
than buying 8 boxes.
I agree.
Independent of price.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we know they're bombarded by all these marketing and ads, and to take them out of that loop for a year, like they can look at that and say, oh, I don't have to worry, I got my year's supply. That's where we want them to be, is, that's not even on their radar.
Right.
They can walk by that ad or,
Right.
display or whatever it is in whatever store they're in and say, I'm taking care
It's
of.
like any item. If you bought it, you don't care what the ad says. If you are looking to buy,
Yeah.
you care
That's
very
right.
much what the ad says. So, yeah, it's crucial.
Very true.
So it's important, annual. What we say is, Mrs. Jones has been approved for an annual supply, so we bring it up in front, and occasionally they have a conversation based on, I just want to get half of your supply, but I'd say, majority of the time, absolutely, patients are doing the annual. The rebates, I don't know.
Rebates are-
Yeah.
Let's talk about those.
Yeah.
That's just what I was going
That's
to, I
real
just made a
critical.
note. How, does that help you with the annual supply
Absolutely.
notion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that it's tied to where you got the exam. I think,
Cooper Vision.
yeah.
Yeah.
So for Cooper, that's really smart to say, because if we're giving those out and they decide to not get the annual supply and then they can use it anywhere else and try to shop and get the kind of the best of both, you can't have you can't have it both ways. So I like that it's where you get your exam is where you have your rebate through.
That makes a real big difference.
Yeah.
I heard you say annual exam, annual supply. Any of you go annual exam, annual supply, annual contact solution amount also, and package it all, bundle it together, the solution, the lenses, and the...
We haven't, yeah.
I've
A few
tried
people do
couple
that.
times to do it, and I haven't quite nailed it. But yeah, it's. I know people that do, and they do it well, but it's a toughie.
It's tough,
So,
yeah.
If we don't do it at our practice.
And Phil, you mentioned something
Inventory is an
that I
issue.
thought was
Yeah.
I thought was important, and that is the fact that with the monthly, you saved your employee time without patients coming back as often, even from the phone call message. Well, with the solution, if they come back and get more solutions in some offices, that's just more people coming into the office, which sometimes isn't an advantage in terms of efficiency. So that's kind of a balancing act. Do you prescribe your contact lens solution for the patient? Is it important to you, regardless of which one you use?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think one thing that happens, even with the best lens out there, like the Biofinity, is that you've prescribed a solution, the patient's been using that same solution for a couple of years, and they end up over at Costco or Walmart or wherever, it doesn't matter, Target, and they find a solution that's on sale, and they say, well, I think I'll just try this. And I think one of the things that we need to be careful of, when a patient comes in for an unscheduled visit with some complaint, it's really important to go back and find out what solution they're using. And every once in a while, I have actually found that they've gotten a less expensive solution that's maybe not a current generation, that doesn't have all of the comfort added to it.
And they think there are generic versions because they're used to that with medicine, and so like like a green box. Well, they now make a green box that the patient thinking they're actually being good, but why spend this much if you could spend that much? And I said, well, there is no generic to this. That's a 20-year-old solutions, and so you've gone through the effort as a patient to an exam, Biofinity lenses or any lens, and then to save some money, they switch to something which is a very old technology. So the solution, you're absolutely right, it's a crucial part of it.
And contact lens success sometimes depends just
Right.
on that.
Yeah, as
Exactly.
you mentioned earlier, the comfort is the number one dropout
Yeah.
reason for patients discontinuing lenses. So, I say I'm prescribing this solution. It's what works best with this lens that we've decided is good for you. It's the healthiest way to maintain your lenses and keep your eyes healthy. So, and there are generics out there. You might be confused, but this is what's going to be the best for you. And what we found with the generics is patients can develop a sensitivity over time to these preservatives that are they're not as healthy for your eyes.
Sure. I'd like to know your experiences a little bit about the concept of having inventory, which someone just mentioned a few minutes ago, versus ship to patient. And there's always a debate about why patients take their prescriptions elsewhere. Is it price? Is it convenience? And you hear the argument on both of those. Certainly, the more lenses that you stock, or at least the more often you have exactly what the patient needs, the convenience argument's not there because you've certainly met that. How does that fit into being able to maintain the lens purchase in your practice as well as the exam?
Right. I try to avoid the cognitive dissonance. I think the longer the time frame between when you fit it and they actually get that annual supply, the more they're going to be subject to people saying, well, why didn't you go there to buy it, and so forth. So I've always felt there's nothing easier than putting 4 boxes in a bag, handing it to them and saying, there you go, you're all set for the year. So that's what we try to do. I think, there are space issues in some offices, so I think a virtual inventory can and does work. And I have friends that do that very successfully. But for me, I try to give them the 4 boxes so they can be done.
On the bioaffinity spheres,
Yes.
you do.
Yes.
Yeah, we do the same. Been doing that for years. It
Yeah.
works well, and our rep's good at helping make sure our inventory is full, and we've got all the powers that we need.
What about your relationship with your rep? Optometry is somewhat a relationship business, if you will, and we have a lot of different reps from a lot of different types of products, whether it's equipment or antibiotics or steroids or contact lenses. How important is the team of you, your staff, and your rep? Is that an important part of the puzzle?
It really is. I mean, they're the ones that are, again, making sure our diagnostics are up to speed. Our technicians do that, but just filling in, taking back products. I think one of the things I like about Cooper is very flexible. A lens doesn't work out, or we're changing, the toric didn't work, we're changing to another lens, and we can take back, as long as they haven't gone through half the supply. Exchange lenses, and very flexible. It makes it easier to service the patient's needs and make them happy, and really that's what we're trying to do is,
And a good rep helps with the efficiency thing we've been talking about also, that they can help speed up the whether it's returns and then the training, dinner meetings to get your staff trained up on annual supply, new products and so forth. So I've been very blessed with a very good rep for many, many years, and it really makes a difference.
Yeah, our Cooper rep is he's fantastic. He always obviously helps us with the inventory, but I think what's great about our relationship with him is he's always presenting us with ideas of what Cooper Vision's doing, sort of what's, kind of like what we're doing for our patient. What he's coming in, he's telling us, this is what Cooper is doing. This is what can help your practice grow. These are some of the concepts. This is what's going on in the industry, and keeps us up to date. And for us, to be able to have that short meeting and get updated right away, I think it's very valuable.
So are you all satisfied with what's coming out of Cooper Vision Corporate in terms of staff training, educational materials, new ideas for efficiency and productivity? Do you feel pretty good about that?
Absolutely.
yes, yeah.
I like the aspect that they've sort of reached out a little bit towards sort of practice growth and social media in that aspect. I think they're dabbling in that and supporting some of the private practices, and that's definitely in some ways getting away from what we're talking about for contact lenses, but I think that's an added
But it's all about productivity and efficiency.
Yeah, it's a great lens, and then if we get some support on that side with the lens, that's great.
And attracting new patients. I mean, really, it's how often you see the patient, how much they spend when they're there, and then the new patients. Those are your 3 ways of growing your practice. So, see them more, charge more, and see more new ones. And the social media is where that aspect of what brings those patients in.
So, Phil, those things that you just mentioned, which are very important, companies call those value-added benefits. And I think the companies that do the best job with value-added benefits, as well as that relationship with the rep, are the ones that we tend to go back to and use more often and become true partners of ours in business. And that's very important. Real quick, we're getting near the end here, but I want to just real quick talk a little bit about extended wear modality, because these lenses are in fact approved for 30-day extended wear. 5 to 7 days is what my colleagues who do use that, and they're getting fewer and fewer, recommend. But how do you all fit into that extended wear equation? Some people have expectations of when they come into my office, they'll actually say, I want those lenses I can sleep in.
Right.
So occasionally I get that, and you can talk to them about health and everything, but still there are patients that still do that whether you want them to or not. So how do you all handle that?
Well, it helps. I asked them, I said, do you ever nap or sleep with your lens? And a lot say yes. So that leads me to say, okay, well, I'll be fitting you with a biofinity lens because this is a very high oxygen lens and do so. I think ODs, we tend to underestimate how many of our patients are doing that. So, and so that's one of the other things that help. We talk about shifting patients. I mean, that's another way to do it, to say, well, you are napping or sleeping with the lens, and I assume you're going to continue to do that since you've done it for many years. So let's just make sure the lens that I fit you with is in alignment with that.
Would you fit a lens, in fact, that wouldn't allow them to sleep in it just in case? You just stated the fact that a lot of patients sleep in them a little more than maybe we suspect. So is that important that it is approved for extended wear?
Yes, I don't push extended wear. I make sure they know it's healthy or certainly not to, but I'm also very pragmatic, and what we think people should do, they have a whole different opinion of what they should do, and so it's a built-in safety valve to be able to fit that.
Yeah.
And like Ashley was saying with the teens, she fit a lot of teens with the bioaffinity. We know what their habits are, and we can recommend and prescribe you take these out at the end of the day, but we know they're falling asleep in them. And yeah, we say you should be taking them out, disinfecting them, putting them back in the next day, but occasionally you fall asleep. We know that can happen. It is safe, and we give them drops to use in the morning when they wake up. So I would use the word flexible wear. I mean, not that we're saying this is what we want you to do, but we know it happens. So let's just say it and say, here's how to manage it.
Yeah.
Right.
I have patients that come in with extended wear 30 days, approved by the previous doctor. So that's what they've been used to for a couple of years. And I think what I try to say to them is that we have a lens that's approved for extended wear for a weekly basis. And I know you're used to being 30 days, but the healthiest is to not sleep in your lenses. But obviously they have a certain habit. And I recommend switching over to this bioaffinity lens to wear for extended wear for a period of a week, take it out, week, take it out, and try to change the habits slowly. And hopefully they realize that so they have the lens out, they feel much better. Hopefully go.
I've told patients, they make 30-day lenses, but they don't make a lot of 30-day eyes. They can handle it. So what we found with other patients is, 3 to 4 days, a week at the most would be the longest you could wear them. Extended, continuous wear. Got to take them out, give your eyes a break once a week, minimal. Yeah.
An older colleague of mine used to say, "You don't get a prize if you wear them a month." So.
I think finally here, although we've touched on this, maybe we should just talk about something that all of our colleagues out there are thinking about, or hopefully they're thinking about, and that is...
Kirk, and I apologize, but I have to stop that last question because I'm afraid we could go on for an hour with that. You were going to go into management.
Yes.
If I could cut that.
That's
because
fine.
the time is running really tight.
Yes, I realize that.
But what I would like to do very much is if we could just kind of as a wrap, Kirk, if you could just let everybody summarize from their perspective about bioaffinity as a modality and bioaffinity as a lens. And just feel free to take a minute or so just to talk about your experience, inject bioaffinity in there as you're speaking to it, but very specifically to talk about bioaffinity in your practice and kind of encapsulating what we talked about today. And again, very conversational. If you're comfortable with that, and Kirk, you can read that, and then that'll kind of wrap us up in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
It gives us enough time where if you guys have any questions that things were not reviewed that you want to talk about in more detail, you can feel free either to do it now or we can do that after.
Great.
Okay. Thanks very much, Kirk.
Good. So as we draw near to the end of this conversation, I'm very impressed with everybody's practicality and level of experience in the office, and I know your ideas are going to benefit a lot of our colleagues out there. So it's really been a privilege for me to work with you on this project. And I wonder, in summary here, we've been talking a lot about bioaffinity, contact lenses, both as a lens itself and as the modality that we've all chosen to fit these lenses as. We talked about comfort for sure and visual acuity. Let's kind of wrap up and just summarize what's important to you about the lens and the modality, and any final tips for our colleagues out there.
Guess I go first.
Phil?
I think for me, in terms of the bioaffinity lens, when I kind of take the framework of what I do every day, day in, day out with the contact lens exam, it has to be a lens that can benefit my patients, that can benefit myself in the practice. I think that's definitely the win-win situation. And with the bioaffinity lens, I think, the comfort, the fit, the initial fit, the parameter that, like the range of parameters that can be used in patients and the different types of patients, myopes, hyperopes, presbyopes, that's a win for the patient. For me, the efficiency of it, profitability, tension, referral, that can be built on a lens. I think it's very unique. And, so that's one of the reasons why I fit. I really, truly, we do a great. Our partnership with Bioaffinity in our practice is great.
That's as good a summary as I could expect. I mean, you hit just about every important point. That's wonderful.
Sorry.
It's always best to go first on this kind of thing.
Yeah, apparently.
That's what you get for sitting across from me, because I'm looking right
I
at
know.
Yeah, what he
Jack?
said.
What did he leave out?
Well, nothing, but I find fitting Bioaffinity actually reduces the stress of fitting contact lenses because the science is behind
Boy,
it.
you got to put quotes around that one. That is a great tagline.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to worry about things like with so many other lenses. Well, that's good with it, but that's not as good, and so forth. But we can fit the Bioaffinity family of lenses, and it's easy. They're good lenses. The patients are going to accept it. The whole flow with the staff works really well. So it truly makes it simpler and less stressful for me to fit contacts to be able to fit Bioaffinity.
That's perfect.
Yes, yeah. So what Phil and Jack had mentioned is, the convenience, the ease, comfort, immediate comfort. I mentioned earlier we have multi-specialty practice, meaning we see a lot of post-op patients. And Philip, you probably had this experience, but just some real quick anecdotal stories. We had a keratoconic patient who had done cross-linking, was post-op minus 15 and minus 13 with about 2-3 sil on the cornea. She failed out of one of the soft cone lens designs that are out there. It didn't work. So my partner's going to fit her with a sclero, but he says, I got to get her something to see. Puts on some Bioaffinity spheres, a 10 and a 12, got them in stock. They're there, 2025. It masked the low modulus, masked the sill. You just let's get her around. He was hoping for 2100, but here she was, 20, just amazing. And so thinking about, and it's just kind of eye-opener. This happened 2 weeks ago, but what we can do with these lenses, and even the simple. So you don't always have to go to the complex first, but try what's simple. The patients are going to like it first. You don't have to jump on the hardest, most difficult thing. But look at that. And I had just one other quick one. Patient come to me from a surgeon. He was going to flight school. He was halfway through. He'd had hyperopic PRK, wasn't seeing like 20/40. Couldn't refract him. I put in some Bioaffinity torics. He was like +1, -1. Put on these torics that I had in the office on a Saturday. She was, what can you do right now? And I said, I got some lenses. Send him over. We'll see. 20/20. Yeah, he was able to complete his. He was looking at a career that he had to change. He was halfway through a $60,000 education that he was going to have to chuck, and it was just amazing. So these stories, I know they're out there. We all have them, but just fantastic with the diagnostic lenses that we have in the office.
Well,
Ashley?
Ditto. My thing with Bioaffinity is that it just works,
Right.
and it is easy, and it works every time, and I just don't have problems with it. The fitting sets were, like I said, with the two Axis 180 and the multiple D lenses, and really think it just makes it all easier and more efficient, and patients just don't have problems either, and that's why I fit Bioaffinity. Works.
That's great. So Bioaffinity lenses take the stress out of fitting contact lenses, and they just work. I think we should leave it at that. Thank you
like
all
that.
very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's great.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Outstanding. Now, is there anything that you all wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to? Anything?
I can't think of anything.
Well, on behalf of Cooper Vision, thank you all very much. It was just so good to hear.
Thank you. I enjoyed meeting you.
And to hear how well this is working for your practice. You all have certainly my card, Michelle's card.
Good job, thanks.
You've got a contact down inside
Good.
of our finger,
You made it
one or two.
smooth and easy.
Well done, buddy.
Yeah.
Enjoyed
Issues
it.
or
Look forward to
questions,
working with you
please
again.
Call us direct. We'd love to take your calls.
Let me get you those two sheets if you want.
Do you have a card? I was going to give you one of mine.
I do.
So
Let me
you-
grab it back over here.
Thank you.
Sure I got. Now, did I give you a card?
Yeah.
Okay, I did. Okay, I think I got.